So as I'm going through this short deck, folks, anyone who's listening in, feel free to type in your questions in the chat. Like Suhas was saying, perhaps we'll get time to do a Q&A at the end of the deck, or perhaps when he's doing Q&A. So feel free to sort of leave your questions. I'd love for this to be interactive rather than just me going ahead and giving this monologue. So yeah, so without sort of further delay, let me sort of start talking about cognitive traps and how to avoid building them while building products. So the first question, obviously that comes to your mind is, what's a cognitive trap? I'm sure you would have heard about a cognitive bias. Cognitive trap is something similar. I mean, it is, I think, best. I mean, if I were to define it, I would say cognitive trap is a systematic error in perception due to the environment that one is embedded into. So think of it this way, right? I mean, uh, you are embedded in a particular environment, and intelligence. I mean, sometimes we feel that intelligence will help us uh, do the right actions, pick out the right choices, and so on and so forth. But if your environment is structured in a specific way, you are limited in your behavioral repository on how to act based on just that environment. So whatever errors you may end up making, they're not errors in the classical sense that you made a mistake, but those are errors in the sense of that these are systematic. These are predictable errors because of the environment that you're embedded into. I was talking about systematic error not being, and this is really like contextualization of cognitive trap. So cognitive trap is the errors that you do because of the environment you're embedded into. And so these are not errors in the classical sense of that you say 2 plus 2 is 5. Those are obvious errors. These are the errors which you would expect anyone in your position to do, because the environment around yourself makes you do those errors. And I was just talking about this simple example to contextualize that definition. So I'm sure all of you on the call would know that for the longest of times, all humans believed that Earth was at the center of the universe, and all the planets, sun, moon, everything else revolve around the Earth. Uh, because that's what we saw when we looked up in the sky. Even today, if you aren't taught that Earth is actually not the center of the universe, and anyone would tend to believe that sun revolves around the earth and moon revolves around the earth. So again, like I was saying, this is a very predictable and systematic error, because the perception fools us into thinking that everything else is revolving around earth, while it's actually not that case in the truth. So it's important to differentiate, and that's what I'm alluding to, that cognitive trap is something which is very hard to see beyond, and intelligence has actually very little to do with it. In fact, if you're more intelligent, you get to start justifying your beliefs due to environment as your own conscious choices. So cognitive traps are actually systematic biases that are very hard to get sort of beyond. And similarly, another example, I'm sure for those of you who would have read Nassim Taleb's Fooled by Randomness, and I guess this is a classic example. That book just made it popular. If you are a chicken, imagine, you are a chicken who's getting fed every single day. You'll get to, I mean, you'll feel happy about this, right? There's someone who's taking care of you. There is someone who's very nice to you. Someone is just feeding you every day. And your happiness and trust in that person will keep on increasing over a period of time until, one fine day, it's the slaughter day. And so ironically, a chicken is happiest just before it gets slaughtered, because every day a kind-hearted person feeds it free food. So again, this is a cognitive trap. This is a bias wherein because of this repeated exposure to a happy event, you tend to form certain beliefs which are not embedded in reality, which are not true beliefs. So I think the crux of it, and you'll get to see in a moment how it's related to building products. The crux of it is really about uh, how our immediate environment shapes our reality, right? It's this simple idea that leads slowly to all kinds of biases that come into building products. What as product managers, product entrepreneurs, startup founders, we see around ourselves is the sort of belief we end up uh, embedding within ourselves, whether it's true or not true. So in this cartoon, you see someone who's really wanting a helping hand and feels relieved that he's seen a boat. And the same thing happens with the person who's on the boat who feels relieved they've seen the land. When in reality, both are screwed in that sense. All right. So again, like I was saying, uh, uh, connecting this cognitive trap to or cognitive bias to product manager. So product manager, like product manager obviously is a human, and a product manager's reality is shaped by her environment. And what is product manager's environment? So on the left, you can see all the entities that shape up the product manager's reality. So there are customers with their requests, their feedback, their usage, their non-usage, then their competitors and markets. When a new launch happens or when some new trend comes along, then there are engineers, what they tell product managers, what technology is interesting, what's not interesting, what is boring, what's not boring. And then there are designers who have their own opinion on the style and so on and so forth. And finally, of course, it's product manager's manager and their style. And lastly, the CEO, their hopes, expectation, vision. So all these entities shape up the environment of the product manager. And so on the right, you'll see that even though if you go and ask a product manager, what's your explicit goal? The explicit goal, I'm hoping the product manager will answer that my goal is to own and deliver the best product to the customers. But because of the complex environment that gets shaped up through the entities on the left, like customers, engineers, designers, there's all sorts of these sometimes secondary and sometimes they become primary implicit goals of a product manager. For example, the implicit goal is getting a high appraisal in yearly reviews. Implicit goal is to stay busy in the organization, and then the goal is to do things that articles on Medium say that a product managers do. Also, not to spoil relationship with coworkers, and then finally have this sense of exerting control on the world by influencing the product direction towards personal taste, because all of us have our personal taste. So the gist is that even though the explicit goal is that you need to deliver the best product, but all these forces they start shaping up behavior so that this explicit goal slowly starts disappearing and degrading, because then from a moment to moment perspective, depending on what organization you're embedded in and what your own personal nature is, you'll start chasing these implicit goals rather than explicit goals. And obviously a lot of times these implicit goals will be in conflict with explicit goals. So, so yeah, it's just that this again cartoon shows how complex motivations can become when we're embedded in such a rich context. So, just thinking that product manager's job is simple, I think that's not the case. Uh, there is a lot of these complex forces that are shaping your day-to-day choices on what to build in the product and what to actually do in your job. And it's important to sort of just take an honest reflection of what your motivations are actually and if they are related to building the best product for the customers. So let me take like a brief review of a couple of cognitive traps, and of course there's lots of them. I will just name and pick a few of them to make this concept even clearer. And hopefully it'll just concretize again what could be still a little abstract discussion on cognitive traps. So the first one, what I've observed, and again this is not really all theory, this is all what I've experienced with myself building products and also in Wingify, uh, seeing the product development happen. So this is really grounded in what I've observed again and again and again happens while building products. And the first and biggest one is always confirmation bias during user interviews. And again, I'm sure some of you may be aware of it, but it's just so hard to sort of fight against this bias, right? And this bias is nothing. I mean, it is hard to sort of first, what this bias is. I mean, this confirmation bias is really wanting to filter out conversations that we don't want to hear and selectively paying attention to conversations that make us feel nice. And I'm sure, uh, this is how I also started doing interviews. And I think one of the things which is very difficult is that sometimes as product people, we end up thinking that interviews are the easy part because every know how to have conversations, right? We have conversations with friends, we have conversations with parents, and naively sort of thinking conversations, interviews do feel like conversations that you get on a call with a customer and you're having those conversations like you'll have with a friend. But that's not the case, right? With customers, I mean, our aim is to gather information, but with our friends, parents, colleagues, a lot of times our goal is to either impress or get impressed, and our goal is to sort of have nice conversations, and that's all sort of gets imported into our customer conversations if you're not very careful about it. So first, we do tend to pose questions to customers in a way that gives us confirmatory answers. So if you ask a customer, do you want this feature, for example, or other such similar questions like, do you like this feature? Will you recommend this to feature? Asking these probing, pointed questions to a customer where customer has nothing at stake, then no customer would want to hurt your ego and be the person who says, no, I don't want this. So intellectually, customer, I mean, it's just true. If you ask me if you want this, if you like this, if I'm meeting you for one conversation as a product manager and I'm the client, I'm never gonna say that this is something that's not nice. Customers as humans are also nice in conversations. So you'll end up having a very confirmatory sort of a conversation uh, and not derive information. So A, we tend to pose questions in a way that give us the answers that don't hurt our ego. And the second, when we also do research online, we tend to find facts that support our hypothesis. So for example, if you have a particular idea in your head that this is what we should be doing in the product, you'll selectively tend to focus on doing search or research in a way that brings in only those sorts of things. And Google is a great way to do confirmation bias. If you think your product should go in X direction, and if you start typing maybe X competitor or X market size or whatever, you'll get all the opinions on those. While obviously, if you're not searching for anything else, you'll not see that. So whatever you end up searching, again, even if it's just a very marginal opinion in the market, but you see 10 results based on only that topic that you're interested in, you'll end up forming an opinion that this is perhaps the most important thing in the world. Even though in the bigger sort of actual reality, it may be just a marginal fact, but you'll never realize that because Google will show you what you're searching for. And thirdly, confirmation bias creeps into when we are also summarizing. So if you're taking customer interviews and you've surveyed like maybe 10 or 12 or even 15 customers, when you're summarizing for finding out trends, there is this implicit bias where you'll tend to ignore anything that violently conflicts with your assumptions, with your hypothesis, with your beliefs. You may just say it's an outlier, while you'll tend to latch onto facts, even say isolated in utterances or something which is very minor, but if it conforms to what you were trying to seek, you will tend to latch onto it and over-index in your summary. So confirmation bias is really, really hard and common, and but the question is, why does this happen, right? And I feel this happens, and it's just not my feeling. There's lots of psychological research on this also. It's because we evolved to protect our ego from all attacks. So we hear what we want to hear. I mean, the evolution has not constructed our brain to seek out the truth. Evolution has constructed our brain to survive. and certainly mean that you latch on to truth. A lot of things. People sort of say naive and you will hear naive things. Doesn't
Paras,
mean that you'll go on the actual information. Yeah.
no, so
Hello.
sorry. I think we got a bunch of messages saying there was a lag. So sorry to get in, but I think it's getting better now. So I think you could just go ahead. I'll just drop you another note in case we get a lag.
Okay. Feel free to sort of interrupt if there is a lag, and I can go back and sort of share the parts again if
Perfect.
something wasn't clear later.
Yeah, I think it was just the last 10-15 seconds where there was a little lag, but I think it's good now. You can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So in the last 10 seconds, what I was talking about, why do cognitive biases happen? And and I feel the cognitive biases happen because we are evolved to protect our ego from all attacks. So we hear what we want to hear. So we're not evolved to seek the truth. We're evolved for survival, and survival manifests in a lot of different ways, right? If every day our brain made us listen to the truth, we would have been just demotivated and unable to act in the world, because we'll see evidence where we are wrong all around us. So and frankly, it doesn't matter for survival, right? That in some abstract sense we are right. We have to just survive in literally the evolutionary sense. So keep that in mind, that when we are thinking, thinking correctly is a very difficult and conscious act. By default, all these biases creep into thinking without you ever realizing. And in fact, intelligence has very little to do with this. Lots of highly intelligent people also suffer from all these cognitive biases. So, in many senses, intelligence is orthogonal to cognitive biases. And similarly, you may have read about this phrase called observation is theory laden, which just means, that whatever theory you have in, and theory doesn't mean the theoretical scientific sense theory. Theory means, your assumptions of what's important, what's not important, how the world works, and theory literally influences what you see. So whenever you're looking at an article, whenever you're reading something, whenever you are listening to a customer conversation, all those inputs into your mind are filtered by what your existing beliefs are, and they are not necessarily true, because you tend to filter out those inconvenient truths. So cognitive bias, cognitive trap number two is what I call as efficiency bias. And this is also what I've seen again and again happening. And this efficiency bias, specifically for product managers, is for keeping engineers busy. You know, I'm sure uh, this thought must have crept in, wherein if engineers are not very busy, it suddenly starts feeling that you're missing an opportunity to do something more in the product, because usually sometimes development team is so busy that you're running on a backlog. So on those few occasions where you feel that someone has an idle capacity, or there is this extra bandwidth that you could be tapping onto, that just creates its implicit pressure to act, implicit pressure to make the extra bandwidth utilized. And that again, what it leads to is things like these, wherein we just end up building things that shouldn't be built. And I've taken this example of Android based espresso machine. And of course, this is just a cartoon example, but we all know how many features end up getting built, um, uh, just because we felt there was extra bandwidth. But again, I would urge you to think that whether that's the right approach. Maybe sometimes a part of the product is just done, and then it doesn't need to be touched for some time, or in fact forever. But if there is this pressure to keep on doing, keep on acting, then no, your product will never be done right, or a part of the product will never be done. But that cannot be the case. If you keep on adding stuff will necessarily become complex. And I think this is a hard trap to avoid, the efficiency cognitive trap, because in an organization, you have to show that you're working because you're getting paid. Think about two scenarios, right, where someone has done their job really effectively in 1 hour and they're idle for the next 7 hours. And the second scenario is where someone is just doing something for the entire 8 hours straight. Then from an optical perspective, it feels that the person who's just worked for 1 hour has created less value than the one who's been busy the entire day. Although it's obviously like a bias, because overworking, over engineering, building more features can actually lead to a reduction of value. So in many senses, the first one, who's just working less, could be creating more value for the organization. But most organizations will sort of value the second person who's just always busy. And so it's unfortunate, but again, it's an example of a cognitive trap, because the the environment of an organization is leading to these choices. You have no choice but to constantly keep engineers busy, keep yourself busy, even if it's in the interest of customers for you to stop and not maybe build that particular thing. So cognitive trap three, the customer development bias that neglects modes. So customer development is a term that a lot of you may have heard before, which is about getting guidance from customers, for lack of a better phrase, guidance from customers to help you develop a better product. So this is a very popular phrase in customers in product management. But what I feel is that this bias, where relying excessively on customers to guide your product roadmap, it ends up neglecting building moats for the business. And what is a moat? So moat is something which prevents competitors from stealing your customers' revenue. So in the old times when we had these beautiful castles, they had these many castles in Europe had, and in fact forts in India also. You would notice they had these boundaries filled with water, and these made to be the sort of natural defenses against an incoming attack. And in business, this is also what's called a moat, wherein there are certain features of the product or certain parts of the product that make it hard for customers to switch to a competitor. And and moats really matter. And in fact, this is Warren Buffett who's popularized the idea of moats in capitalism. So what he says is, capitalism is all about somebody coming and trying to take the castle. Now, what you need a castle that has some durable competitive advantage, some castle that is a moat around it. And so, if you are a fan of Warren Buffett, you would read in a lot of his annual letters that he tends to buy businesses with strong moats. So with Coca-Cola, it's their brand, and for Gillette, again, it's their whole business model of selling their razors cheaply while they make all the money in their sort of proprietary blades. So he tends to value um, businesses with moats a lot more, because in capitalism, profits tend to go to zero. You launch something, your competitors launch something, and at the end, customer is who gets the ultimate benefit of this competitive rivalry. But if it's hard for competitors to steal your business automatically becomes more valuable. And the reason customer development bias uh, makes harder to build like a defensible business with moats is because your customers will never tell you to build moats. You when you interview your customers will never tell you that they'd like a longer contract, and they like their data logged into the platform, and they like to uh, build habits around your product. That's what customers will never say, right? It's a unicorn if you assume a customer will help you build a defensible business. But all these things you have to do as a product manager to help build like a competitive business. You have to build things that prevent competitors from stealing your customers. But if you rely too much on customers, you'll end up building features that add value to your customers, but they may not necessarily add value to your business. And I do feel that being just customer driven leads companies to their deaths. you build feature request after feature request, and at the end, uh, if you end up creating something which is amazing, a competitor will come along and just most likely underprice you, and that becomes like a treadmill for companies where only customer wins. um, so like I said, as a product manager, sometimes you need to build features that your customers will hate. And uh, and an example, and I know this might be a little hard to digest and believe, but if you see around yourself for enterprise software, take Salesforce for example. Now we use Salesforce at our own company, and there's lots of things we get frustrated and hate Salesforce for. For example, their sort of, you need to pay if you are on Salesforce and you need to migrate to another CRM, you need to pay for their API to be able to do that. Now, this is something they didn't have to do. They could provide their API for free. They could make it very easy to migrate to another CRM, but they choose not to. And that creates against an implicit hesitation when it comes to us switching to someone else. Again, this is something which we hate Salesforce for, but at but in the longer sense of things, this has helped them build a more valuable company, and channeling that more value back to the product is just led them to build better products over time, because they were playing a very long game rather than the short game of just satisfying customers. Um, and cognitive trap 4 is selection bias that only selects for vocal customers. By vocal customers, I mean, if you see your customer base on like a Gaussian curve or a normal curve, there's obviously all types of customers you'll have in the mix. There are some customers who will be very pissed off with your service or products, and there will be some customers who will absolutely love you, and if you reflect what are the types of customers you're talking to, I'm sure you'll realize that day in and day out, you're most likely talking to customers who are pissed off or customers who love you. And this just manifests everywhere, right? When restaurants give you feedback forms to fill, you only fill it when either you love it or hate it. And most people are not in that category. Most people are just satisfied. They're either not hating your services or not they're loving it, but you'll never get to hear from them. That's the sort of trap. So when you're talking to customers who are just satisfied, right? And I would argue that's a majority of customers, that they do not reply to your emails for feedback, or they do not really come on conversations with you because they are living a busy life and they don't have any particular negative or positive bias towards your product. They don't reply to your request of conversations. So you either end up talking to customers who threaten you with things like, add this or I'm going to competitor, or you talk to super satisfied customers who give you more features to add to. And if you listen to these extreme behavior customers, you end up building a complex product. That's as simple as that. If that's the only voice you're listening to, you will end up realizing that that voice is what the voice of your customers is, and not realizing that people you are not talking to, who are not replying to your emails, probably are the majority of your customers, and they are maybe just satisfied with your product. And fifth cognitive trap is similar, which is around complexity bias, which reduces simplicity over time. And I'm sure you would have seen, if you've been with a product company, or if you've been seen a product evolving over a period of time, you would have seen things tend to go from simple to more complex. So you'll start with the form on the left. Over a period of time, you'll get form on the right. And I've also wondered, why do interfaces go from simple to complex? Why do things start simple? Software looks simple first when they are startups, but as they start evolving, it's just more and more complex over a period of time. And I think it happens because as career of a product manager within a company evolves, they forget what it is like to not know anything about the product. And this is the most subtle yet one of the most damaging kinds of biases, because imagine you've joined a new company and you're looking at their product from a fresh pair of eyes. You will see a number of things. You will have questions. Slowly and steadily, you will get familiar with the product. But as you spend more and more time in the company, maybe you've spent 1 or 2 or 3 years now, those parts of the product, that earlier were confusing to you, they come so naturally to you now that they almost, become invisible to you. Then you end up spending more time on things which are complex, where most of your new users are struggling with things which are just simple, that they don't even understand. So as you get more familiar with your own product, you'll have less empathy with new customers who don't know anything, and more empathy with customers who demand complexity. So if you go back to the previous screen, right, when you've joined a new company, you knew something on the left, it was easy to understand. But if you keep looking at that screen, you will start talking to customers who want more and more flexibility. You'll add Twitter buttons, you'll add so many other things that uh, because you understand what's happening, you fail to realize that new customers may be finding this extremely complicated, because all you're talking to is people with complex needs, because you think you understand what it is like to use a simple product, because at one point of time you did that. It's just the same thing, right? Customers who are using your product for the first time after getting training, they don't struggle and they end up becoming power users. So as a product manager, your job is not to become a power user of your product. Your job is to have empathy with different types of customers, so that you end up making a product that works for all customers, whether they're power or they've just looked at your product for the first time. But I've seen that a lot of product managers end up becoming power users of their product, and that ends up making them prioritize complex features. And that's why software goes from simple to complex. And I guess this is the last cognitive trap in my sort of call, in my presentation, which is that beauty bias leads to bad design. And it's I'm sure, for many of you like me, this thought comes that whenever we are seeing stuff, we see a lot of bad design in our own products, and it feels like the entire product is can use an uplift every now and then. And I guess this happens because designers get their ego attached to the product. And this is a classical example that you would have seen, right, where you feel that the product is a reflection of if you feel product is a reflection of your own taste, I think you're doing it wrong, because product should be a reflection of what your customers want. So this is the classical, this Venn diagram where English teachers end up over interpreting what the author meant, right? When author said the curtains were blue, the teachers end up thinking that the curtains represent his immense depression and his lack of will to carry on, when the author really meant the curtains were sort of fucking blue. And a complete example of this is, right, when customers want X, we end up giving Y. So because we can't stand like maybe a mediocre product or something which doesn't look good to us. So when a customer asks us that whether we can provide reports in Excel, maybe they literally want reports in Excel, because that might be the process at their end. But sometimes we end up interpreting it as, let's make better looking reports. Similarly, if the customer says, I really want this to load faster on mobile, and in the process of it, if we're reviewing our mobile site, I know there is an implicit bias of just let's revamp the entire site because it doesn't look good. But maybe the customer really meant that the loading time was frustrating and everything else was okay. And similarly, there's lots of such examples where we overinterpret what the customer wants because our ego is attached with the product and we're not looking it from customer point of view. So summing it all up, I'd encourage you to remember these biases. The first one was confirmation bias during user interviews. To counter this bias, I came across this book called The Mom Test. Google this. I think it's not a very expensive book, but this is a good book which dives more into this particular bias and how to overcome it. It gives you tips on what to ask, what not to ask, so as to minimize the confirmation bias. Um, and and the gist of, I mean, the reason it called the mom test is, it sort of puts the analogy like you'd never ask your mom, do I look good? Your mom will never say you don't look good. In the similar way, the customers never tell you the truth. They would be nice to you. So you need to create your conversations in a way to derive that truth rather than derive that nice things that they end up saying. And second, on the efficiency bias, you could read this book called The Goal. It's again about how just because everyone is busy, bottlenecks get created in an organization, and organization ends up doing things that they shouldn't be doing. So I like this book, and you could go and read that book also. A third one was around customer development bias that neglects moats. And I would encourage you to read more about moats and switching costs. And fourth one was about selection bias that only selects for vocal customers. Again, this is a hard one because how do you go and talk to customers who are not vocal at all? But that's what's required to have like a well represented diversity. So you have to go out and very consciously increase the diversity of customers that talk to you. So don't just talk to customers who want to talk to you. Go and consciously seek customers who would otherwise not just be inclined to talk to you. Maybe you have to incentivize them. Maybe you have to use something else, but you have to consciously increase the diversity. Otherwise, you'll just talk to people who are frustrated or happy. And the fifth one on the complexity bias, I'd encourage you to allocate maybe once a week, just talking to new users and not talking to the users you're very familiar with, because most of those users will also end up becoming power users. So you have to make this as a process so that you seek out and talk to people who have no idea about how your product works, so that you look at your product from fresh pair of eyes every single week. And lastly, the beauty bias, which can lead to bad design. You have to do a lot of deeper research to completely understand customers' environment, because maybe a report in Excel will create a lot more value for your customer than a very beautiful one in your own product. Maybe the customer really wanted the Excel one because it works in their environment and not your shiny sort of reports. So solution for all these cognitive traps, bind yourself to reality. Again, this is, I like to think of it in, you have to see both pixels and shapes, because we end up seeing shapes when those shapes don't exist. And that's our brain projecting our world model onto the data that's coming in. So be very, very cognizant of what you're interpreting and what is the data. Otherwise, you'll end up mistaking your interpretation as the data, while it is just your interpretation. And the closer you are to reality, the closer you are trying to remind yourself of the environment you're embedded in and how that might be shaping the data you're getting, the better you'll be able to go and consciously seek out additional data for you to get a complete picture of reality. So you could do this find your own bias game. Maybe analyze your last 7 days of work and list down, at least 10 biases that might have impacted you. And 10 is just a number, but uh, all this may sometimes sound that biases is what happens to other people. But even in the single day, even yesterday, Friday, if you do an honest reflection of your own actions, your thoughts, I'm sure you'll start recognizing how your environment would have led you to doing things which you may have thought came from you. So go and start listing your own biases, and the only solution to cognitive biases, cognitive traps, is to be aware of them and to keep reminding that you're just embedded in those biases. And embrace the complexity. If that's what's the truth, our brain, our minds, our natural bias is towards simple but wrong answers. But sometimes maybe your product roadmap has to be really complex, and maybe that's what's needed. Um, and um, and maybe sometimes what's needed is simple. So what you need is to see is the true picture rather than going towards just a simple thing. Simple could be wrong, could be right, but usually we will bias to simple, even if the correct answer is complex. And lastly, catch yourself feeling happy at work. I know this sounds counter counterproductive, but I've seen that whenever I'm just very happy at the work, there is at least some bias at play. And it's not that I want to deflate my happiness and start feeling sad, but it's just an indicator that perhaps um, I'm mistaking something as the reality, my own opinion. So it's just a great indicator whenever I'm very happy about my own thoughts, my own achievements, to reflect and see whether that's actually true or whether that's my mind convincing me that that's true. So remember, you are a product of your environment, and your environment shapes you, and you shape your own sort of product as a product manager. You're not just an completely independent character that can make any product that wants to. So you have to work on you, product manager, first to be able to make great products. I think that's about it.
Absolutely.
I,
No, thanks so much for this, Faras, and switching back to gallery view. Um, Bharat, before we jump into, I think we've got some great feedback already on your deck. So before we jump into, a little bit about your history, some anecdotes, getting deeper into the how and the why of the deck that you had here. One thing to keep it light is, how's your meme game so strong? Where does Paras Chopra hang out on the internet?
sorry, name game.
Yeah, a meme game, like every slide had such, I mean,
Oh,
people didn't need to even listen. That one image was like, great. So where does Paras Chopra hang out? That's one common. I got it on a private chat, but where does Paras Chopra really hang out on the internet? We want to know this.
yeah, I spend a lot of time on 9gag. I'm not sure if
Okay,
there are any 9gaggers here, but
I'm sure that.
9gag is my comfort food. And yeah, I mean, I really enjoy good memes. I think they say a lot more than what text can say at so many abstract levels. So
Right. No, thanks so much. Yeah, I think yeah, just to keep it light to start off, but yeah, I think a lot of feedback coming in where everyone's saying that the deck was awesome. So would you be open to sharing the deck with everyone? Post the chat.
yeah, I could.
Oh,
Yeah, I
okay.
can make a copy and send it across.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks so much. So jumping straight in, I think this deck was hard hitting. I just caught myself nodding at every one of those, and really need a reflex. So this weekend would be a good exercise for all of us. Guys, happy to do, like, block your calendars for 30 minutes. We could all just come together and do that exercise, because I think it's super interesting. As product managers on this call, as entrepreneurs who've joined us early stage, especially, um, I think all of us are going through this. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sure I'm not
it's
alone in this. Yeah.
no,
But
you're
I
not
mean, these are like
alone.
hard hitting truths. You just put it out there, and in this 30, 40 minutes, like everyone just like, okay, even I'm there, even I'm there. So yeah, I think over the next 30 minutes, just to give you guys a brief glimpse, we have a couple of questions for Paras, which is essentially going deeper into, like especially that summary slide, Paras, the one you shared. I think somewhere
Mhm.
where we can go deeper into these
Sure.
confirmation biases, and also to hear more about your journey. I think most of us follow you on Twitter, so if we could go deeper into some of just get to know Paras a little more, that would be awesome. So
Oh, yeah,
Akash and me will
Sure.
be curating this. I'll just kick off the first one, and then we'll be throwing out questions. Guys, please do add your questions also to Slido link. We'll do 15-minute questions from what we have lined up, and another 15 from what you guys shoot out on the Slido link.
yeah, but just want to check with Paras here. I know that it was a 1 hour
Oh yeah,
event and the
and
calendar
plus,
super packed, but yeah,
Sorry, I took more time. I didn't
no, that's
realize.
fine. That's fine.
that's
Would you be okay to extend it by 10
Yeah,
minutes
I
if that's
have
okay?
time.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. Awesome, awesome. So yeah, without further ado, getting started. As far as I think the first one that we have for you is a little around your journey. I think as a bootstrap founder, growing Wingify, right from scratch to I think over 20 mil in annual revenue right now. Um, would love to hear more about that journey, and one two parts to this question. Would love to hear more about that journey, how you started. I think you shared it earlier, But if you could relate it in terms of biases, something that you were thinking back then, some anecdotes which helped you realize, because that would help a lot of people connect as well. And towards the end, what are some things in 2020 that you do radically different? Hey, this is what I used to do in 2010 to what I'm doing in 2020. Some learnings that you can share with all of us.
Right. So, I mean, a little bit of a journey, like I think Akash was saying. I started my journey long back. I I've been inspired by Paul Graham's essays a lot growing up. So I had read when I was, I think, 16, 17, I had read his essay called "Why to Do a Startup," and I think he contextualizes a lot of things in a philosophical way, while not being very abstruse with what he's saying. So whatever he was writing, it made sense, and somehow at that point of time, I just felt I had to do a startup, and I was also reading this book called Founders at Work, and Founders at Work had interviews, and it's written by Jessica Livingston, who's wife of Paul Graham, and she had interviewed lots of founders who were relatively new ones back then. So it had interviews by Google guys, Yahoo, PayPal. So you'll find, I think, interview of Peter Thiel in the PayPal context. Before he was as well known as he's now. So throughout all those interviews, what became clear to me was that us starting a company and making it big is possible, even if all you have is a laptop, because that was literally what all of those people had, because when I was growing up, the whole thing of a company was, I mean, again, it's the same thing, right? Where if you're embedded in an environment where all you hear about big industrialists like Reliance, Tata's, Birlas, I think this idea of starting up becomes very difficult, because you don't know how to just start with a factory, because you've seen factories and you associate that with entrepreneurship, or you associate that with big industrialists. So again, reading this book made my mind open to the fact that starting a company is possible, even if you're not starting out with laying down a factory, that even if what you have is just a laptop. And that's what I just started trying to do. So throughout, and again, I was a bit of like a non-conformist. I don't know how, but I was that. So during my engineering, I started taking, I took biotechnology, because I thought I knew everything that's there to know about computer science from my school. Again, a very wrong and very naive view, because all I knew was coding, and computer science is obviously much more than that. But I was just I was just arrogant in that sense. Ki, haan, I know everything. I need to now just know something completely new. And bio was something I didn't know at all. I didn't have biology in my 12th, so I just took biotechnology at Delhi College of Engineering. And in fact, I think that was a good decision in retrospect, because it made my mind open to a completely new domain, which I wouldn't have been exposed to if I'd taken computer science or IT or some similar degree. So, um, but I still tried to link what I was doing in bio to my passion with computers. So I was doing a lot of academic research in computational biology. So I tried to combine both and try to do computational biology. So throughout my 4 years in college, I was always split between doing a startup or trying to pursue academics so that I could eventually get a PhD. I was interested in both. But at the end, the startup direction
Understood.
was like, uh, it ended up pulling me a much more in a stronger fashion. So I did about 3 attempts at startup in my college. And of course, looking back, it also reinforces this whole thing where environment shapes reality. All 3 of the startup attempts had to do with some problems that only college students face, because those were the problems that I knew about. One was to do with, I think one was a music site for college independent bands, because in our college fest, there would so many new upcoming bands, some of them Hindi rock, some of them just local college bands, and they were not popular. They were not as popular as Bollywood. So in my mind, I ended up convincing myself that this is the most important problem to solve. because this is a problem I was getting exposed to again and again. But in reality, nobody cared. Nobody cared for this problem so much that it deserved to be like a proper startup. And this happened, 3 times, where I was trying to solve a student problem that students face, and of course, making like a successful, viable company, unless you're running Facebook, is very difficult. Students don't give you money; they don't have any money to share. So when I reflected on a lot of these problems, I realized that again, two things. One, I was solving just problems for students, and second, I wasn't doing marketing. So again, because I was comfortable with coding, my bias was towards coding. I would code, I would call it a startup. I would get frustrated why it's not working on. I will move on. So so when consciously thought and reflected that, because I thought myself as reasonably smart person, so I was like, why I'm not able to do a startup? What's wrong with me? And the answer sort of started growing on me that just because you've coded something doesn't mean that people are going to use it. And in retrospect, it's such an obvious thing, right? It's like, how could you miss it? But I'm sure for a lot of entrepreneurs, this is a hard realization that a lot of us live in our own heads. We end up getting convinced of a problem in our own heads. We end up feeling that whatever we're building is really important and people will like it. And when that whole realization meets the hard reality, I think that's when we learn our big lessons. And that's what I learned. So the fourth attempt was that now I thought, I'll just do something in marketing, because I was reading, again, interestingly, uh, I would say this was a bias that ended up in working in favor for me. So I was reading so much about marketing that I now thought I'll make a startup around marketing. And luckily, in retrospect, it ended up working. But again, it could have not, because I ended up believing that marketing is so important that a business could be built on top of it. So yeah, that's long story short. A lot of sort of stumbling around to finding the problem that eventually ended up helping Wingify scale.
In the early days, were you coding? Like till which do you think you were actively involved in the tech and coding? Because now I'm pretty sure you're more like at Twitter bio says generalist. You're more on the operational side of things, helping the company.
Yeah,
So
so I wrote the first version,
okay,
and I think I'd been coding until 3 or 4 years. I mean, in fact, the
okay,
first one was entirely built by me.
oh, nice.
From just, in fact, there were two versions to Wingify. The first
Uh-huh.
version I had built taking 8 or 9 months, very complicated product that nobody wanted. And I had to throw all that code and then write VWO again, just working on that simple problem at one thing and doing that really well. Uh,
Right.
for the last 2 or 3 years, I've started coding again, and
Okay.
now I prototype a lot of stuff myself, and that's been the change. I've started making time for myself, and that's one of the reasons I became a chairman from a CEO, to carve out that time for myself to be able to do lots of things that I enjoy to do.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Did money flow in early as well, given that you were more B2B enterprise, or did you, since you mentioned, right, sales and marketing maybe wasn't your forte. So how did that journey early on look like? Say, you built out your first prototype, you built out how many months till you hit your first dollar? How was your mindset back then?
Yeah. So the first prototype I had made in December 2009, and launched in December 2009, and it was like a free beta, and the
Okay.
free beta ran for until May of 2010, so about 6 months.
Six
And
months,
I
yeah.
had quit my job around March. So 2 months
Okay.
I was without salary, and
Okay.
that was like a leap of faith. I had started feeling that I was getting so many support requests uh, by uh, by users, that I knew that I'd be able to make some money out of this. I didn't know how much money, but I knew. Then I remember early on, some beta user from Microsoft had said, you have gold in your hands, you don't realize that. So all sorts of these feedback uh,
Pushed you.
just pushed me to quit my job. And after 2 months, my goal was to make an equivalent amount of money as my salary, which was
That's awesome.
50,000 rupees per month. And
Yeah.
I'd I told my parents, I told my friends, if I make this amount of money, I can call myself an entrepreneur
Mm.
working for myself. And in the first month, made 4 times this money.
Oh, wow.
And that's when I realized that this could be bigger than I thought, and it just kept on sort of piling on from there.
Did you go in solo back then, or was this like a couple of friends who you had, or how did that
Yeah.
initial team come
So I
together?
was doing almost everything solo, but I was talking to Sparsh, who's co-founder.
Okay.
Sparsh he was at London working full time. So
Mm.
I would bounce off ideas from him. And in January 2011, about say about 9-10 months after I quit my job, he also quit his job and then came to India and joined me full time.
That's nice.
Right.
That's nice.
And
Okay, I think that gives us a great insight into those early days. Akash,
yeah,
do you want to
that's
go up next?
yeah. I mean, just an extension here. So, what about the marketing piece? So, you know, just because you were a single founder, yes, Sparsh was there, but just want to understand how did you even get the word out? 50,000 rupees was maybe your aim. You ended up making 4 times the money, but I'm sure you had to put the word out to actually get that money. Just want to understand, as a bootstrap founder, how do you get the word out?
Yeah, I guess
First.
I think what helped with marketing was that the product was so much better than what was out there initially. And so much better, I mean, some order of magnitude better in what it did for the customer. So back then, A/B testing was very hard. You had Google Website Optimizer, but you had to code your own versions, upload them on servers, and so it was all in all a technical job to set up even a simple A/B test where you would maybe change a button color, and it would take weeks for you to do that. But using Visual Website Optimizer, because it was visual and it would let you, I mean, now what is taken for granted, the visual editor for A/B testing, it was really innovative back then. So because it reduced the time taken for setting up A/B tests from weeks to hours, I think that is what got the initial attention, and what led to a lot of word of mouth. So I genuinely feel for products, word of mouth initially is really important, but word of mouth only happens if products create that at least 2x, 3x improvement over existing alternatives on some dimension. I mean, just 10%, 20% improvement will not cut it. For people to really talk about the product, you do need this 2x, 3x better on some dimension. And the dimension this was better on was compressing the time it took to A/B test. But it could be any other dimension, right? It depends on the sort of market you are in.
Yeah, that makes sense, and leads me to another question, something that I've always wondered, right? If you look at an A/B testing platform, because VWO was purely an A/B testing platform when it started out with, essentially you have a hypothesis that your version B of the website, let's say, might be better than version A, and you make that decision based on data, right? But once you made the decision, what essentially is happening is that you get I mean, that version B is better, right? That's probably the conclusion you're coming to. But the pricing, if you look of Wingify as such, was a subscription-based model. I'm really curious. Once they found out that version B is better, why would they continue paying for VWO? Why is it a SaaS subscription model as such?
Yeah. So again, it's what you're describing is something which companies and teams who are doing A/B testing for the first time approach A/B testing as, where they approach A/B testing very tactically, in the sense of I have an idea and want to test it, but uh, as you go into say medium and high maturity customers, for example, take Booking.com for example. Every year they run 25,000 tests, and Airbnb at any point of time they would have 1,000 simultaneous tests running. So for a lot of organizations, A/B testing and experimentation becomes the way their business runs literally. So Amazon.com, Google.com, at the core, all these companies are actually experiment-driven companies where they happen to either have a retail store or have a search product, but each and every decision for many of these companies are actually just experiment driven. So nothing, in fact, even for product features or anything else, nothing goes out for many of these companies without getting A/B tested. So in that sense, you're never done A/B testing, and that's why, just like analytics, I mean, you'll not say I've looked at the number and I'm done. It's just the same way, you've done an A/B test and now there is something new to test, a new feature, a new copy, or a new pricing.
Awesome. And yeah, you tested humans against GPT-3.
Yeah.
What were the results like?
So interestingly, I think we're about to conclude it, but in majority of cases, either it was a tie between AI and humans, or the AI one, which is very surprising. So I guess I will maybe just put the link here. I have it handy.
Yep.
Results tab. But it was very, very interesting. It was completely unexpected, and we felt that even if it's a tie, it's a win for an AI because it's successfully fooling people. Because I mean, an AI fooling humans into writing coherent and believable copy is a good
Yep.
enough progress in itself.
True. What's one myth about AI, or what are three things that you think AI will disrupt first in the next very short term, like a year or 2 years? What do you see actually happening? But they've been speaking about this for a very long time, right? And I think you've been following this, you've been tweeting about it. So what are three things with India as a scenario? What are three things that AI will hit first? Like someone just said content creation, and maybe that's something that you've also been
Yeah,
experimenting
I
with.
mean, content creation. So I guess, I mean, you'll start seeing a lot of uh, personalized, well-written content.
Mhm.
So be it the video emails, video pitches you get, be it the blog posts, the guides. I feel going forward, or even podcast or so on and so forth. So say things like interactive movies, where you can stop a movie at any point of time and maybe change direction of the movie, and rest of the movie will adapt completely,
That's
and
nice.
that's still being coherent. And similarly, podcasts, imagine in a podcast you can pause and ask questions to the hosts, and the host sort of answer you and adapt rest of the conversation depending on your questions, and all the quality of that podcast still being similar to what two humans talk about. So I do feel a lot of content which is recorded right now, be it blog posts, podcasts, videos, movies, all that content gradually will become interactive, so that whatever questions, ideas, things the listener or the reader has, they will get adapted into that content automatically. So imagine you're reading an article and you can ask questions to the article and get believable and coherent answers right then and there. So that's what we're talking about. But I do feel with that, a lot of, I mean, fake news will become harder to detect. So
True.
that's a depressing thought, but I feel that's inevitable, where
Yeah.
we'll feel a more sort of uh, more polarization, because anyone can make such believable content to reinforce your bubble that you'll not even realize you are in a bubble. And we'll just see a lot more of it. I think we're already seeing that in many places in US, where the polarization is increasing, and I feel that polarization will even increase.
Yeah. So is Paras Chopra excited about AI? Is he
Yeah,
afraid
yeah,
of
I
it?
am. No,
Okay.
I am very excited from a technical point of view.
Yeah.
Though I do feel from like uh, from a humanistic point of view, AI has to, I think, come in hand with something like universal basic income, because it will impact like livelihood of a number of people, and we cannot just shirk off our responsibility just because something is exciting. And I do feel that's again thing. A lot of people get excited about AI and forget that it's having a real impact, positive and
Mhm.
negative, on the society. And the negative impact we have to just face front and square and deal with it.
Fair. No, I agree with that. Do you want to share a little bit about Kurumsa here? I think I came across that while we were looking into your thing. So how you're trying to build an alternate search, which
Yeah,
exactly isn't Google, but very interesting things. Do you just want to
yeah.
share a little more about how that's been developing?
Yeah, so the larger context is, I like to think of Krumsa like projects as side projects of Wingify. So
Yeah.
because we are bootstrapped, we have luxury to not being accountable to any investor, and not really get to hear that why you're getting distracted with side projects. So I do realize that this is a distraction from the main business. But again, it's like what you say. Unless you create diversity or a range of options, you cut off both ends of the curve. So unless you're experimenting at a wide range, you'll neither get a too positive result, nor you'll get too negative result. You will keep playing in the sort of middle. So keep playing in the middle is essential. It's essential, and that's what growing a business means. That you put your head down and do what the business needs you to do, and 90% of 95% bandwidth goes there. But that 5%, creative urge has to come somewhere, and that's where say something like Kroomsa comes in, where with the pace that AI is evolving, I'm just very excited to reimagine what search could look like, and just been experimenting with that, and hopefully something good will come out of it.
Yeah, I
Very
mean,
interesting.
okay, just one fun question here. Uh, you had the domain called Kroomsa in 2009. Is it just because you wanted to
Yeah.
retain the domain name that
Yeah.
you
So
called?
this is actually what was the music site that I was talking about. I built in college, and
Oh,
the domain was cool short, and as I said,
okay.
let's reuse it.
All right.
Interesting. Interesting. Very interesting. Awesome. Akash, do you think we should take a couple of audience Q&A? I have a set of rapid fire for the end that we usually do. Do you want to jump into audience Q&A here?
Yeah, I think that's the best thing. I mean, I just
Awesome.
wanted to add that all the questions we asked now also were from the audience itself.
Curated from there.
Very
Yeah.
curated from the audience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Uh, that was like we send out like these questions on the registration form. So we curated some from there.
Okay.
Now are the live Q&A. So we'll just pick some from Slido, which are right on top. Um, to start off with, I think I Praful had asked this. What are you currently optimizing for at this stage of your life, Paras?
Hmm. I think, I mean, I'm I'm optimizing for. I mean, now I feel there's very little to lose. I mean, in the sense I've always felt that, but early in your career, when you're doing a startup, you do feel there's a lot to lose, in the sense that you have to prove to someone you could do that, and so on and so forth. I do feel that that I've done, like I've built actually not just one product but a couple of products, and now I felt that I understand how these SaaS products at least could be built. And so right now what I'm optimizing for is really not protecting the downside, in the sense of preventing that I shouldn't make mistakes and so on. I want to optimize for really doing great work in my 30s. I'm in 30s now, and I with the experience of last 10 years and all that I've reflected upon, I want to just push myself and the Wingify team a lot more that I've done in my 20s. And that's what I'm optimizing for, the drive, uh, what's the max I can push myself and the team.
Nice. Nice.
And just okay, so this one is a little different. It actually comes from you write about so many different things, right? So first of all, wanted to understand your writing ritual. Secondly, wanted to understand how do you even make time to read about so many things and then write about them.
Yeah. Um, so I had taken a sabbatical. I've taken 2 sabbaticals now, and I think that have. I mean, whenever you start feeling that you might be getting burnt out, instead of just pushing through it, when I just find it helpful to take a step back and just be completely off work for some time. And I remember emailing my team that unless the company's on fire, do not contact me. And that's I think that created so much of mental space, because we're so busy day to day. There's no time for reflection, so you have to create that conscious space. And I felt that my time with sabbatical, where I had nothing to do with work, that gave me like a big leap in terms of my ability to think about how the world works. And that free, I mean, you have to have free mind, mental space, which is just unattached to any sort of immediate concerns. to be able to do that intellectual development. At least that's the case for me. And once once you get this habit where you once you realize that you don't have to be necessarily attend to all the firefighting that's happening. I think every day since my sabbatical, I've started creating time to read. So my morning, almost before lunch until like 3 or 4 p.m., I've blocked in my calendar just for myself. And I don't usually take any meetings during that time. And all I do is, what I want to do, rather what other people want me to do. So very consciously, either I'll read, I'll code, or I'll plan, or I'll write a document. But that is, my time every single day.
Right, right. Perhaps another one from Monica here. I think in the retro, it's easy to say, okay, hey, I was looking at my bias and maybe I built this. In the retro, that is easy. But is there any smell test or any set of questions, anything while you're in the process, while you're building something? Is it a gut? Is it instinct? Is there a process to it? Is there anything that you follow that helps you?
Um, so actually, consciously going out and asking people uh, where and how you could be wrong is the only thing that can help. And that, I mean, as a habit, what I've started doing is whenever I have an idea or a project or something else, I want to consciously sort of in my discussion ask people, how do you think this is wrong and why do you think this is wrong? I've found that, asking people how something is wrong is much more important than asking what do they think about it. Because unless you push people to tell you how exactly you're wrong, people are not going to tell you. And you yourself cannot find out how you're wrong because you're just living in your own head. So really, you have to seek out disagreement, seek out a counter opinion, and very consciously find out how you're wrong, because most likely you're sort of looking at a very partial view of the world, and it is hard to see the entire picture from that partial view.
Right.
Fair enough. Okay, maybe last two questions was or
Yeah,
uh,
probably one more from audience, and then we can jump right into the fireside. I think we are 20 minutes over time, so
yeah,
we,
sure. So maybe the last one here. So Ayush asks, basically, should we design products for an average user or a new user or a power user? So does it depend on the industry, average retention time of users on products? So that's the question. And an
yeah, it's a good
extended
question.
thing from me was because you spoke about how moats are very important for you. So just wanted to understand if you saw any moats in your business or in your industry.
I think is it just me? I think
No,
Akash
no,
was,
I
yeah.
think his screen got stuck. Uh,
No problem.
anyway,
Maybe
I'll
you
take
could
an
start.
attempt,
Yeah,
yeah, to answer the first part of the
yeah,
question. I think the answer to who should you design it for, as a company, it's for everyone. I don't think you cannot neglect the power user or the average or the new user. You have to, as a company, you have to sort of satisfy all three. But it also depends on uh, what stage your company is in terms of its maturity position in the market and what your company goals are. So it's a very contextual. The point of singling out these three types of buckets is to make sure you're at least aware who you're not talking to. But who you should be talking to, I think it just depends on where you are in the company, what your company wants to do. But for our case in VW, we want to say talk to all three types of, because if you miss out on one, the product ends up becoming a representative of, I mean, it doesn't have a voice of a particular type of customer, right? Imagine a democracy where you are missing out including a very big part of your sort of population. It's just like that.
got it. Got it. Fair point. First, I think we'd love to jump. There is still questions pouring in. I'll probably take a copy of these and send it over to you in case you have some time on Twitter. But we have one
Yeah, and
very
you can
quick.
tag me on Twitter and you can ask me there, and
Yeah,
I'm happy to answer all the questions.
let's do that, guys. If you have any additional questions, if you just posted something that we couldn't take right now, feel free to just tag us on like Paras. I think we'll add your handle in the chat section as well. do tag us, and Paras will be happy to engage with your tweets. Paras, one very quick rapid fire to end this. We have 5 quick questions for you and a closing question.
Okay.
And lot of folks find this fun. So this especially, like, given everything that you've been sharing on Twitter, some of it might overlap, but we'd love to
Okay.
do this. First up, what are 3 early stage startups that you're really excited about? Something that maybe most of us wouldn't have heard about, and maybe just out of stealth, but something that you might have access to.
Oh, okay. I don't follow early stage startups that much, but
Okay.
if you were to call OpenAI as an early stage startup,
Okay.
I would say I'm very excited about what they're doing. And
Right.
similarly, in the same space, Hugging Face, they're also an NLP startup. Uh, they are they are doing a great job as well. Yeah, that's about it,
That's
I
awesome.
guess.
No,
And again,
thanks.
this rapid fire is all about me just jumping onto the first name comes to my
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But in case,
head.
like, later, in case you come across something, do share that as
Sure,
well.
I will.
Next one is about what are the top 3 books you've read in 2020? I think you shared a bunch of them that you read. I mean, you're spending a lot of time these days reading, so you shared that on Twitter. But what are
Yeah,
some top 3 for folks looking to start?
yeah. So one book I really liked is called Origins. It's about how Earth how Earth got shaped by its geological past. So it was an amazing how humans also got shaped by geology. So it was an amazing. It's again reflecting to this session. It was also about how um, say geological features literally shaped our history. And there's this one book that I'm reading right now, which I'm really enjoying. It's called The Mystery of Existence. It This entire book is on the question, why does the world exist? And in the end, the philosopher doesn't end up giving an answer, but you end up learning quite a lot by just this question. And the third one, again, I'm almost done. It's called The Secret of Our Success. And that book is also about how our culture was shaped by our drive to copy from each other. So it's a very unique take, and it's not non-fiction in the sense of being written by a non-specialist. It's written by a professor who's done his research in anthropology. And again, what's been apparent to us is what puts humans apart from our primate ancestors, primate, is is really our ability to copy, and that is what shapes our culture.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Paras. Next one we have up here is, who are 3 folks that you'd like to give a shout out to? It could be Twitter, it could be your mentors, it could be, just for folks to, follow. Um, Great
Yeah,
friends that
so
you might have. Anyone that you like to give a shout out to?
yeah, so the first one would be my wife, who I also work with. Her handle is sia_steel on Twitter and wowsig on Instagram. And in fact, she's illustrating all the chapters of my new book. So my new book is
Nice.
about mental models for entrepreneurs, and she's a fantastic artist and illustrator. And also, that she's the first person I bounce off all the ideas with. And second one would be my co-founder Sparsh. So he's not as much active on Sparsh, but go and follow him. His handle is Sparsh Gupta. And 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 the third one, I'm sure a lot of you follow him, but also I enjoy interacting with Kunal Shah. I
Yeah.
think we share a lot of interest, and our approach.
Yeah.
I mean, we tend to have very interesting conversations.
Right.
So he's the person I go to if I have to discuss something, and he
Right.
also discusses a lot of stuff with me.
Right. I'll be honest with you. I just got a private chat sometime back. I thought I'll use that for the closing. Was essentially, can you guys please get Naval, Kunal Shah, and Parag Chopra again for a fireside chat? And I thought, okay, that would be a great way to end this session. But it'll be interesting to I think, yeah, I think all of us agree to a certain extent. You guys share a lot of wisdom with all of us on Twitter. So thanks for that. Um, Another, like, continuing with the rapid fire, we just have 2 more here. What is one common PM myth that you hear all the time, but you totally go against? I think you shared a couple of them on your slides earlier. But what is one
Yeah.
thing that when you come across, you're like, Why are people even, thinking about this? Or why are they even saying this?
Yeah. Um, I think I would say probably, I mean, this is something I used to believe, but I don't believe it anymore, which is, that the product manager is the CEO of the product. Uh, I, I, I don't think that's the case. I think that's a too simplistic a view. And I feel it also reduces the influence, implicit or explicit, that CEOs and founders have. I, I do feel that founder is the so-called product head. The myth that you could have a product head or a product team that works completely in independence and ends up delivering a great product, that never happens. So the product team has to work very, I mean, as a part of the entire company, and especially has to be very closely in sync with what the founder and the CEO sort of aspires the company to be. So because I mean, if you keep on believing PM is the CEO of the product, you'll never listen to the founder, and you'll feel that why is founder interfering in my work? But it's literally founder's work. The product is what the company sells. So
Right. Absolutely. And the last one to wrap this up is what it's the other way around. So, what is one common worldview you hold strongly, but no one agrees with you on this? Could be Sia, it could be your co-founder, it could be anyone else in the company or your friends.
that no one agrees with.
Yeah,
Uh,
you believe in it 100%, but no one else seems to agree with you on that.
hmm, okay. Yeah, I think I mean, if I were to, I I think it's really hard to change as a person, and that's a little bit deflating, because this means a lot of advice, and including this session,
No. Yeah.
is just for kicks and not have as much influence as I'd hoped to, because I
Right.
know that a lot of us would nod and agree, but go on living our lives, because obviously I'm not saying everyone needs to change radically, but that's the case. All of us have our own lives and our own ambitions, our own biases, our own genetics. So I do feel, and that's where I keep debating with a lot of my friends. My friends feel people change, good advice works, and a lot of these things. And I feel it's just, if at all it works, it's incredibly slow. People are set
Mhm.
in their own ways, and that's why, if someone is motivated, they're motivated irrespective of whether you are incentivizing them, asking them to be motivated. If someone is not motivated, will not be motivated, and
Right.
that's about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think, Paras, to wrap this up, any closing thoughts? So this is one question that we asked. If you knew then what you know now, so essentially, what would Paras tell himself in like mid 20s? Say you were in your mid 20s today. What are something that you'd love to share in the retro? So a lot of us, I think, who are mid-career professionals here would benefit from that in the retro.
Right. Yeah, I would say not getting satisfied too soon, because and satisfied not in the sense of being anxiously driven, but in the sense of being happy for the fact that you have opportunity to grow. you know I felt a lot of times we feel that the career is plateauing and there is nothing more to learn, but that's more about, I think, our own belief rather than about what's available in the world. So I would say in my like 20s, where for a brief period of time where I felt stagnated, and I felt that there is not a lot of exciting opportunity out there, or things uh, that I may not be able to grow beyond this. I think that is a myth. The world is so large and so exciting that if you felt you're stagnating, it's probably to do with your own self than for the fact that how much opportunity and excitement and things to learn are in the world. So
Absolutely. And I think that's where the entire thread around generalists and specialists and lots that
Yeah.
you write about. So guys, do interact, do go read those threads. I think we shared it earlier in the chat section, but definitely spend your weekend on that. I think that's a great primer in case you aren't reading any books, in case you have some time this weekend. I think that's just an extension of this 90 minutes. I think it's 90 minutes.
Yeah.
But Paras, thank you so much for your time. I think it was a great chat. Like Akash shared earlier, we were super excited for this. Last night we were, just jamming around late night to think, okay, how can we make this more useful? But thank you so much for your time. It was super amazing chatting with you. And yep,
This was great. Thanks to us. Thanks, Akash. And thanks,
thanks.
everyone. I hope you enjoyed the session. I will share slides later.
Sure.
And perhaps Suhas can share with everyone else. And if you have any questions, Paras Chopra on my handle is Paras Chopra on Twitter,
Yep.
and I'm happy to answer any of your questions there. Okay, bye bye.
Thanks so much,
Enjoy
Paras.
your
See you.
weekend. Yeah,
Thank you.
bye.
See you now.
Bye, Akash.
Bye. Thanks, guys.
So thanks so much for hanging around, guys. I think hope you guys enjoyed this session. Like Akash said, I think we were actually more excited about this. Achinmay. So guys, I'm going to be stopping the recording. But if you guys just want to hang around for some more time post the session, we're just trying to recreate that post-event networking. So if you guys want to hang around, just I think you can switch on your videos. Is that okay, Akash? I'll just switch off the
Yeah, yeah,
recording.